Hey, welcome back. So you did the hard part. You're pre-approved and you're ready to find your first home in Flower Mound, Texas. That's awesome. Yay. But when I say first time, I'm talking about you could be a first time home buyer, you could be a retired person looking to move to Flower Mound. So first time home buyers in Flower Mound or in Texas, it's going to make a big difference because in Texas, as in every other state in this union, all the contracts and everything are different. There might be some similarities to maybe Florida or California, but overall, all contracts and the way they're executed is totally different. So let me kind of go through some of this with you. What you do next is everything, and that's why you have to have an experienced realtor. I've helped hundreds of families move all over the DFW area, so I understand what's going on, especially with first-time home buyers, whether you're young, you're in your 40s or 50s, or you're just relocating here. You need to understand all the steps that are involved. And if you don't have somebody explaining that to you step by step and what's coming next, it could cost you money and cost you time, and ultimately you could lose the property. So I want to give you some insider tips, kind of get through these pitfalls and help you close on your home. And, seriously, please don't, until you watch this, don't even think about writing an offer. So my goal here is just to give you a simple, straightforward game plan. I mean, we're going to cover what's really going on in the Flower Mound market, and even DFW for that matter, because it's basically Flower Mound is a suburb on the north side of Dallas and Fort Worth. Let's talk about writing an offer that wins. Let's talk about the hidden costs that you really need to plan for. So let's jump in. So the first thing, what is the real deal going on for 2025, 2026 in Flower Mound? It doesn't matter what they say on the news. Okay, they're looking for shock value and they're trying to make things sound worse than they are. The real situation right now, as I'm talking to you, as I looked on the MLS, there's over 200 homes in a population town of 80,000 people that are currently active and for sale at price points starting at 400,000 going up to 7.5 million. So there's a wide range of prices. Now, are these homes moving quickly? Yes and no. We've had a couple of interest rate drops. This is November 2025, the end of November. There's a possibility of another interest rate drop. So could that ramp things up? It may not, because there's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines looking to move, but they're not willing to move until the interest rate gets to some place that they're a little bit more comfortable with. So the first thing that's happening is, like I said, the news doesn't paint a good picture, but here's the recent data. And I'm going to read some of this. From 2025, the median sale price is about $588,000 to $600,000, okay? Now you need to be careful here because that's a sale price and a median listing. And the listing price is often higher, sitting around 660 to 675. So you might see prices have stabilized a bit from last year and think you can take your time. That's a mistake. I can tell you, everything that sells, it's based on price and condition. If I were to sell you a house for $1, you would buy it, no matter what the condition. Yes? So it just depends on price and condition. You might, it's a mistake to think that somebody else may not be looking at it. You don't know when you're looking at a house, you may not have time. You don't know who else is looking at the house. You don't know who else had looked at the house. The house that I purchased, there was a couple that looked at this house 5 times before they made an offer. Well, they made an offer that was unacceptable to the seller. I came in, saw it one time, knew what I was looking for, made the offer, and here we are. But don't think don't think that there is a market correction coming. Good homes are still being snapped up. So all I have to say to you is look at what you're looking at. Try to be as clear as you possibly can on what you're looking for, because it's going to make a big difference. So the number that you kind of have to watch, and a realtor can help you with this, is days on market. Stay off of Zillow and Redfin and all those other jokers. Those are all third-party systems that migrate from our MLS system, our multi-listing service that we pay for on a monthly basis. So one source would put the average at about 42 days. You can look at some other group, another data might show as low as 28 days. You don't know necessarily if the property has gone off and on the market several times. So if a property is only on the market for 28 days, let's say, and you happen to be trolling around on some of these websites and you go, you know, I've seen that home before. A home can go off the market dark on the MLS for 32 days. Then it can come back on the market as a new listing. It's a trick. Realtors do it all the time. Or a listing could expire with the seller. Seller decides they want to go with a different real estate agent, which is always kind of a little bit of a red flag to me, but that's for another day. So what it means is that when a great, well-priced home hits the market, you got to be ready to pounce. Plain, pure, and simple. I mean, the best ones don't stick around. Doesn't matter. There's 200 homes on the market. If there's 10 homes that come on the market tomorrow and they're great and priced great, they're going to go. Plain and simple. Another key stat that you kind of want to look at is what is the sale to list ratio. This one can be a little bit tricky. In Flower Mound right now, we're looking at about 97 to 99% of the sale price. So if the house is, $500,000, it's probably going to sell for what, $490, $495? So somewhere in that area. But here's the trick. Here's the deal. The way that the system works is, let's say that the house, and I'm going to use round numbers. Let's say the house started at $500,000, right? And then the price dropped to $475. Well, $475 is the new list price. If somebody buys it at $475, then it's sold for 100% of the list price. So that can be a little bit tricky, and you have to have a realtor kind of walk you through that and kind of explain how that whole situation works, because we have access to the original list price, the sold price, and what that percentage actually means. And this can kind of, in Flower Mound, the crazy bidding wars, it's really not there. I mean, you should still expect to pay close to the asking price for a quality home. This isn't a time to throw in a lowball offer out there and hope it sticks. In fact, somewhere between 16 and 23% of the homes are still selling for more than list price. So that's a pretty big number. And I will tell you that if you go in there and you lowball a person right off the bat, especially a home that hadn't been on the market, that is not how you want to start a conversation on a home that you really want. You need to be prepared to say, okay, you know what? I guess I really don't want this home, because it is somebody's home and they take a lot of pride in their home, likely, and you're trying to steal it from them. And stealing is probably not the right word, but I work with, I've had the opportunity to have people submit contracts, these flippers and stuff like that, and they come in and lowball, and it's aggravating, because they're offering tax value and whatever. But here's the deal. What's the takeaway? The market is more balanced than it was a couple of years ago, and that's pretty much the long and short of it. You've got some breathing room, but for the best homes, it's still going to be competitive. I still see over asking prices, and that's a whole nother deal, and you've got to be prepared for that, and your realtor can explain how that works. But you have to be strategic, and you have to be ready to act. The second thing is, how can you win the deal without overpaying? A great transaction would be kind of a win-win for both parties. At the end of the day, a lot of times it doesn't work, but a lot of times it does work. So you found one. Now what? You write an offer in the seller. In Flower Mound, will the seller take it seriously? It's not And listen, it's not just about the highest price anymore. It's about being smart. So when I go into a contract situation, I try to get a hold of the agent, which sometimes can be a little bit difficult. And I say, you know what is important to the seller? Because it's not always about price. Well, they need a 30-day lease back, or they haven't found a home yet. They need 45 days, or, they really want to sell some of the, the washer and dryer and the refrigerator because they don't want to take that with them. And we've got this pool table and so on and so forth. Find out what's important to them. There are ways to offer more without necessarily offering a higher price. The buyer can pay for the title policy, which is traditionally, not specifically, but traditionally a seller expense. You can offer a little bit more option money. You can offer a shorter option period, which is a video for another day. But, try to use the market data from your realtor to your advantage. The really interesting stat that is kind of significant is the number of homes that have sold in Flower Mound with a price drop. I mean, this is kind of your golden opportunity. If you can find a home that you like that's been on the market for a long time, and long to me is 6 months to a year, that's a huge signal that the seller may be motivated. But if the price has not changed in that same time period, then they're probably just fishing to see if they can get what they want. So if the price is the same for 6 months to a year, then the seller's not super interested in trying to get things going. During that course of that time, the agent can look up the MLS and say, hey, we had this on the market, but then realized we needed to put in a new air conditioning system, or we added a new roof, or, some of the other accoutrements to a home. That could be a huge advantage for you. But all things being said, this would be a perfect time in a situation like that to come in with a strong, fair offer. I mean, I'm not saying don't be afraid to, offer below asking price, as long as you can back that up with some recent sales in the neighborhood. If you're just lowballing because I want to get the best price and you're coming in at $50,000 below, all you're going to do is make them mad. And in Texas, the seller does not have to respond. They don't have to reply. They don't have to counteroffer. I've just went through that situation representing a seller. I had over 20 offers, and most of them were just junk. So now let's talk about, as I was talking about some other ways to offer, there's other secret weapons like seller credits. Instead of asking for a $10,000 price cut on the $600,000 home, so $600,000, so now you're going to offer them $590,000, okay? What you can do is you can put a credit in that contract for $10,000 toward closing costs. The net will still be the same to the seller, is still be $590,000, but what you do is you write the contract for $600,000. You put in the $10,000 credit. So at the end of the day, the seller's getting what they want, but they're helping the buyer out with the closing cost. So the net profit works out the same, but for you, it's a massive win because you get to keep, as a buyer, you get to keep $10,000 in your bank account instead of forking it over at closing. But you got to make sure that, whatever seller credit you're asking for, don't go in asking for a $20,000 seller credit because your closing costs may not be $20,000. This is only for closing costs. And when cash is king, if you got cash, then that's a whole different deal. But here's another kind of tip that I try to do, and you've got to have a realtor that's kind of on the ball and is planning this out. In Texas, so we have the option period, and we have talked about that in the past, but the option period is a period somewhere between 3 days and 10 days where you have the option, the unrestricted right to walk away for any reason. If I don't like that picture on the wall, or I don't like the color of that paint, or I don't like this carpet, I can walk away. That's it. I don't need to give you a reason. I'm done. The seller keeps the option money, which is anywhere from $250 to could be $1,000, because they took it off the market for you, but you get your earnest money back, which another term would, I don't like to say the word deposit, but it kind of is. It's when you're putting up earnest money, you're putting up some consideration, which is money consideration with the contract to show that you are serious about the deal. So, so if you can shorten that period up, so I'll give you an example. So I went under contract on something recently, and before I went under contract, I called my inspector and said, "Hey, what's your schedule looking like?" And he's like, "Well, I can do it on this day, this day, and this day." Well, in addition to that, he could come out 3 days later. In addition to that, I try to give the buyer 2 days, because we don't get to, so let's say it's on a Tuesday, inspection's on a Tuesday, and then that evening, say 8 or 9 o'clock, you get the inspection. I try to give the buyer another additional 2 days to kind of look it over, because you got work and you got other stuff going on. If you're retired, then you got some more time to look at that. If you're relocating, you got that message you are kind of trying to contend with also. The option period ends at 5 o'clock in Texas on the last day. So I try to give somebody a full day one, and then the second day by 5 o'clock. So we need to have an answer. And I don't like to run it up to 5 o'clock, because that's not nice. You want to give everybody an opportunity to try to negotiate in that period. But also, for the buyer, you want to give them time to kind of absorb it and digest the inspection and talk to anybody else that they want to. Or you may need to have some additional inspections from foundation to HVAC to roof, just depends. So if you can do, a 5-day option period, that's great. If you can do a 3-day option period, if you've bought and sold homes before, it's a tight period, but if you know what you're doing and you know what you're looking at, it's a little bit risky, but you don't have a whole lot of time. So 7 to 10 days is really good. 10's kind of stretching it. 7 is pretty much the average. And it screams when you're doing a shorter option period. It says, okay, I'm serious and I'm not here to waste your time. I do want to do it, but I do want to do my inspections. Okay. All homes are bought in Texas as is, unless something has happened and you are requesting a repair at the time of the contract. Video for another day. Finally, if you find yourself in a bidding war, and I don't recommend this for a lot of people unless you got a lot of cash, you can consider doing a partial waiver. But be careful, a full waiver would be where you promise the gap to any offer that you will cover that gap. Okay, so the long and short of this, the house is $550,000. You say, I'm going to offer you $575,000. Well, first of all, you're putting 10 or 20% down, so you got to come up with those closing costs. But let's say the appraiser goes out there. If you're getting a conventional loan, you can't do this on FHA and you can't do this on VA. But you're doing a conventional loan, and the appraiser goes out there and goes, hey, you know what? The house is only worth $550,000, and that's all the bank's going to loan you on. So now the contract was for $575,000. You got a $25,000 gap on top of whether you're putting down 10% or 20%, right? So now you've got to come up with an additional $25,000 on top of that. Do you want to do that? Well, you've signed a full waiver and said that you would. A smart real estate agent on the seller side in this situation would require that you have the funds to cover that in case of a shortfall, because the agent has priced and the seller has priced this property in such a manner that they believe that they can defend the price of the listing price, if that makes sense. If they cannot, you've waived your right. So if you were just to offer the 550,000, let's back that up a little bit, and you offer the 550,000, and the house comes in appraised at 540. Well, then you can go back to the seller and like, where'd you come up with this price? We need to see the comps, and we're only going to pay 540 because that's all we can get the loan for. So that's kind of a negotiating thing, and the full waiver deal was going on a lot during COVID, and when there was just a rush to get homes down here. I went through a process where somebody offered over $100,000 more on a house that was $600,000, I think, and they still lost, and they came in third place. And that was probably the most ridiculous deal, and the people never ended up buying a house anyways. So anyway, let's go on to section 3 that I'd like to talk about, and that's kind of doing your due diligence with specifically Flower Mound. First, the home inspection, it's not optional. You got to get it done. If you don't do it, you're in all, you got to get a home inspection done. Spend the money. It's probably $400 to $500. Get somebody reputable that's not doing 3 and 4 inspections a day and just whipping through it. You need to get it done. And that's once the offer is accepted. Congrats. That's when the real work begins. And you need to zero in on what it is you're buying. Here in Flower Mound, you've got a bunch of brand new builds, and then you've got a bunch of stuff from the 80s and 90s. My house was built in 2000. But even on a new build, I would get an inspection. If you don't get an inspection and the new home, you buy a new home from David Weekley or the Toll Brothers, yes, you have a year to warranty generally on all of this stuff. But listen, wouldn't you want to know what's wrong with the house that should have been done to begin with up front? I mean, are you a builder? Are you a general contractor? I'm not. I've been doing this a long time, but I don't pretend to know something that I don't know. If you're looking at an older home, that has gas appliances, you may want to get a separate gas line inspection. A general inspector, they can check for leaks, but, a pressure test can find some other stuff, because it could end up costing you a fortune later to fix. And it's a small price to pay for, peace of mind. The other factor is when you're looking at in Flower Mound, there's a lot of HOAs, and you need to understand and assess whether what they are restricting you on or want you to be compliant on goes against what you want. Like if you got an RV or a boat, most of the HOAs, they don't want to see that in the driveway. I know I don't. So they don't even want to see it in the backyard behind the fence. So you need to check on those and go through your, HOA documents. And this is a time to do some of that also. You may not get the HOA documents immediately. In Texas, you have 14 business days to be able to obtain those, and you got a couple of days after that to review it. So it's probably not going to happen in the option period, but if sometimes the agent on the seller side will have it, or maybe some past ones, and you can kind of scan. They don't really change a whole lot, but even silly stuff like, can I paint the brick on the house? Generally a hard no in most neighborhoods that have HOAs. What color can my front door be? And if all that stuff matters to you, then you need to find a neighborhood, which there are in Flower Mound, and I can help you with that, that don't have HOAs. Do you need permission to build a deck? Like I'm building a pool, so I had to get a permit through the city of Flower Mound. Plus, once that permit came in, then I had to get approval from the HOA, which was fine. It was all very smooth. I know this is kind of fire hose information, and, we can break it down, make it a little bit easier. But just think about it and, think about what it is that you're looking for as far as a home and the neighborhood that you want to be in. So let's talk about what is the true cost of home ownership and how do you budget for it. One of the biggest blunders I see is new buyers only planning for the mortgage. And the reality is it's so much more than that. If you're getting a conventional loan, you're going to need to budget for the principal, for the interest, for the taxes, and for the insurance. Depending on who the lender is, they could collect up to a year's worth of taxes at closing. They will collect an entire year of insurance, and it could be as little as 9 months. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, I want to pay my taxes separately. Well, and that's all good and fine, but you got to get with your lender, because a lot of times they will charge you an extra interest rate point or half point or a quarter point, because you're going to pay your own taxes and insurance. So, and some lenders just flat out don't allow it anyways. When you're talking about taxes, so the effective property tax rate is somewhere in Denton County about 1.78%. Please don't quote me on that. You can go to Denton County tax assessor. But the rate is kind of a blend of it's county and Denton County, City of Flower Mound, the school district, which is Louisville ISD. So the actual tax rate is somewhere in the 2 to 2.3 range. So on a $600,000 home, that can be a difference of over $100 a month. So your lender, they're going to run all those numbers, and they'll be able to explain it to you better, because it's going to be dependent on what part of Flower Mound that you live in. Next up would be homeowners insurance. And let me tell you, this is crazy. It's all over the map. I have found something through the state insurance board that I'm actually going. I redid my car insurance through the Texas Department of Insurance, and they have a website that you can find all sorts of stuff. Your lender can get you with somebody, but it's kind of all over the map, and you just have to find something that you're comfortable with the coverage that your lender requires. You've got HOA fees that we talk about. I live in Bridlewood. Our HOA is going to be $1,100 for the entire year, but the amenities here are incredible. They keep the grounds beautifully. I have no problem spending, $90 a month to do this. When I was in a condo, I was spending $400 a month for nothing. Hopefully the garbage would be picked up and people wouldn't break into my car. That's a story for another day. But you gotta budget for that. Now the HOAs are generally not part of the mortgage, so you gotta kind of pay that separately, and they're generally due at the beginning of the year. So the safe bet on that, you just gotta. Like I said, mine's 1,100. It could be less in some areas and more in other areas, depending on the neighborhood. You got to budget for maintenance. Once you move in, I don't care if you had the best inspection in the world, stuff's going to break. It's just the pride of home ownership. So if you can set aside, 1 or 2% of your home's value, which if it's $6,000 or $600,000 home, $6,000, you set aside that for repairs, then you should be solid unless you have something major happen. And I'm telling you, trust me on this, stuff will come up. I am a firm believer that something breaks every day. I know that sounds negative, but it's kind of silly, but it could happen. You want to stay financially healthy. And I mean, when you're looking at your home, don't let the lender try to push you into something that you're uncomfortable with. We were qualified for something way more expensive than what we purchased. But I wanted to stay at a certain level and didn't want to look at the shiny stone or whatever beautiful home and just become house poor and not be able to do anything else in my life. So a good rule of thumb, I personally like the 25% rule, but lenders I think are going as high as 30, 35%, maybe even closer to 40, which could be a mistake, but everybody's financial situation is different. You want to be able to, ensure that you're living a good life, right? Without just having to worry about your home all the time. Playing with this color, it's making me crazy. One of the other thing is, neighborhoods. Look at a neighborhood that if you're going to be a first time home buyer, more than likely in Flower Mound, whether you're retired, whether you're relocating, whether you're starting off with a new family, before you even start looking, there's tons of great spots, but you got to find what vibe, and that's why it's super important to try to take some time and not rush into this, to drive the neighborhoods during the daytime, even at dusk, and kind of see people walking around and see if that's the vibe that you're kind of looking for. Like Wellington is just south of me, and it's a massive family friendly community, and it's not just families, but it's retired people too, but I just say families because it just popped in my mind. And it's got amazing amenities. I mean, we're talking about multiple pools, parks, tennis courts. It's got a super active HOA. The home values can go anywhere from $650 to $700,000, $800,000. So you can find more, and it's an incredible place to put down your roots. If you're looking for something a little bit more of a low maintenance lifestyle, you have the Riverwalk at along the river, Central Park kind of area off of Cross Timbers, and that's a really pretty area. It's an area, it's got modern townhomes and villas, and those townhomes can go $450,000 to $600,000, but they're pretty much zero lot and almost zero maintenance because you just have a small front yard and maybe a small backyard as well. But it's more accessible to get around Flower Mound. There's restaurants and shops around there that are right outside your door. There's even a couple of hotels over there that, if you have guests coming in town, they're in walking distance of that whole area. I mean, it's a totally different feel from just the typical suburban neighborhood. So that's something. But don't be afraid to look outside the boundaries of the popular areas. There are so many neighborhoods that are just everywhere. Just great neighborhoods, great homes. A lot of really good builders came out to Flower Mound, and you've got a lot of solid homes. And you can you can find what you're looking for within a short distance, even sometimes a few blocks away. I go out walking quite a bit, and a mile down the road is some newer construction, not new construction. Those homes go for $700,000-800,000, beautiful. A lot of them have painted brick. And then I live in a more established area. I can go up to Double Oak. There's Highland Village around here. There's other areas that are directly Louisville that you can find. So don't be afraid to kind of look outside the boundaries. Keep your mind open. I know that this is all a lot, and getting pre-approved is just kind of the first step, and it can be overwhelming, but once you get under contract, you're on a timeline, and you've got to have an agent that will keep you on that timeline and be aware of everything, and the mortgage company is also, because you are under contract. And just remember, the market is still hot for hot homes, but if you build your offer smart and you kind of follow maybe some of these steps, and if you have any questions or comments, or can subscribe to the channel, you're going to get more information like this that'll help you out. And this doesn't apply just to Flower Mound. This is all over Texas. Buying your first home, especially in Flower Mound, because I love Flower Mound so much, it can be really thrilling and rewarding, but frankly, it can be kind of nerve-wracking, and it can feel like a lot, but you can do this. And if you have the right person to help you out with this, it's great. Just relax and enjoy the process. The key is to stay prepared, to stay informed, and to team up with somebody that knows what they're doing. I can't wait to see you next time. Thanks for checking me out this time, and we will talk soon.